What's happening, everybody? On today's show, a quick preview of the SEC guys in the Senior Bowl, and we'll talk all things ahead of spring SEC ball with JD Pickell of On3Sports. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. Great to have you guys along. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. I want to remind you, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, we dive into it as Senior Bowl is about to get underway, and we'll be out there catching some interviews with some of the guys out there, and a lot of former SEC stars going to be in attendance. And, of course, this is where a lot of guys make their money. Always think about Dak Prescott out of Mississippi State and, you know, having the great week that he did and becoming a riser like he was. You have other guys who attend and, you know, are injured, can't do whatever, you know, for certain reasons or whatever. But remember, Hendon Hooker from Tennessee went last year, just did interviews and talked to a lot of scouts and impressed the Detroit Lions and was able to get drafted by them. So it's a big, big week. So we'll be there in attendance and hopefully catching up with some of these guys and getting some interviews. But just to kind of catch you guys up to speed of guys who have accepted the invites and expected to be in action this week at the Senior Bowl. On the offensive side, and by the way, many of the SEC guys, majority of them are playing on the American side. The national team will have a couple of Florida Gators like Ricky Pearsall and Kingsley Aguakin. But on the American team, on the O-line, you'll have Jeremy Flax from Kentucky, Javon Foster from Mizzou. American wide receivers, you'll have Xavier Legette from South Carolina, and then Ladd McConkey and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint from Georgia. Your American running backs, three big ones: Ray Davis from Kentucky, Cody Schrader from Mizzou, and Jalen Wright from Tennessee. All three of those guys were basically, you know, top five in rushing in the SEC for much of the year. And then at quarterback, you're going to have Joe Milton from Tennessee and Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. And there's been a lot written this week about Spencer Rattler and how he can really improve his draft stock by looking really good this week. And for that matter, too, Joe Milton as well. He had a pretty good year at Tennessee. Wasn't great, but nonetheless, those will be your American offensive guys. And then on the defensive side for the American defensive line, you'll have Jaden Crumedy from Mississippi State, Justin Aboigbe from Alabama, Marcus Harris from Auburn, McKinley Jackson from A&M. Then at linebacker, you'll have Tyron Hopper from Mizzou, Trevin Wallace from Kentucky, and of course, Nathaniel Bookie Watson from Mississippi State, just tackle machine in the SEC. And then in the secondary, you'll have Chris Abrams-Drain from Mizzou, Andrew Phillips from Kentucky, and two of the really good DBs, Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James from Auburn, all in the mix as well. Will Reichert from Alabama, kicker, he will also be represented. So, again, it's a fun week for the Senior Bowl. A lot of former stars from the SEC that really showed up and showed out this past year and in their careers, all getting a chance to impress of tons of NFL scouts. For those who have never been down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy does a great job of bringing in some of the biggest names from across the NFL and college landscape. And then, you know, every team was represented from scouts. And it's just, again, it's always very heavily SEC represented. And go look at the Super Bowl matchup. Go look up and down those rosters, how many SEC guys you had on postseason teams this year in the playoffs. SEC talent galore. So nonetheless, going to be a lot of fun to be down there in Mobile. Again, like I said, we'll get a lot of these guys on with us, catch some interviews. We had some great ones last year. For those of you guys who listened and caught it on YouTube, we had some good conversations with Hendon Hooker we sat down with, and a lot of guys who went on to become big-time players this year in the NFL. You know, guy from Houston we talked with last year, Tank Dell, ends up being a mid-round pick by the Texans and was an outstanding rookie wide receiver in the NFL. So always kind of fun to catch up. We'll have a lot of our locked-on guys down there as well. And like I said, watch throughout this week as we'll have some interviews with some of the guys out there at the Senior Bowl. But again, going to be a lot of fun and kind of just take a little step aside from, looking ahead to the 2024 SEC season, just kind of looking back and appreciating a lot of these guys that did a lot in the conference this past year. Like we talked about, Joe Milton and Spencer Rattler having, nice season. Rattler, of course, capping off 2 years there at South Carolina after transferring in from Oklahoma. Joe Milton, coming in from Michigan and just kind of had to sit on the bench and wait his time sitting behind Hendon Hooker for a couple of years, finally getting his chance to show what he could do this year. But like I said, I love the running backs, the story of Cody Schrader at Missouri becoming the leading rusher in the SEC this year, after coming from a lower level, Division II school, and awesome story from him. Jalen Wright and even Ray Davis was the top 5 SEC rusher at Vanderbilt, goes over to Kentucky and ends up doing the same thing there. So just some great stories of some great careers. Xavier Leggett at South Carolina, he gets a chance with Juice Wells kind of sidelined for much of this year at South Carolina and became a stud, one of the best wide receivers in the SEC this year. So going to be a lot of fun to see what all these guys do this week, who stands out the most and which SEC guy makes the biggest name for himself in front of the NFL crowd. So like I said, keep it locked on SEC throughout this week. We'll catch up with a lot of these guys and have those interviews with you for you right here on Locked On SEC. All right, but before we get to that, later in the week, we are going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the current SEC with our buddy JD Pickell of On3Sports. We're going to preview some of the biggest questions for some SEC teams heading into the spring. We'll also get his thoughts. And look, we're just been doing it with everybody, and we're going to keep doing it throughout this offseason. Where were you when you found out the Nick Saban news that he was stepping aside and retiring? So we'll hit on that with JD and much, much more. That is coming your way next right here on Locked On SEC. But first, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel, and no better time to get in on the action with FanDuel right now because, look, we get it. It is the big game, Super Bowl coming, and happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. And, of course, you can get all of it right there at FanDuel. They got the lines, spread, the over-under. You can even bet on the coin toss. They got it all up there for you. It is FanDuel. They have so many different ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, but like we said, which player will score the first touchdown, how many points will be scored, over, under. All of it is up there for you at FanDuel. And a reminder, new customers, you join today, you get $200 in bonus bets. If your first bet of $5 or more wins, go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. They are the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And check out the app too, FanDuel. Roll along here, Locked On SEC, and look, we're getting ever so closer to the start of spring ball. We already got football players back on campus, they're back on class, hitting the weight room, and before we know it, they're going to be out there on the practice fields getting ready for their spring games. We've already had a couple schools announce their dates for spring games. They already got A&M in Florida, Auburn, so means we're getting ever so closer to the start and the prep of another football season, and nobody better to join us to talk all about it is our buddy JD Pickell of the On3Sports, of course, hosts the Hard Count over there at On3. Does a fantastic job covering the entire landscape of college football. JD, welcome in, man. Good to have you on.
Chris, appreciate you having me on, man. Yeah, that's just wild even hearing you say that we're getting close to spring ball because we ended the season and then Nick Saban retired, so it felt like the season was back on with all the coaching moves and the portal moves. And now we're looking up and it's like, hey, spring ball's actually not that far away. So all the vibes are high, it sounds like, with college football being year-round, but I appreciate you having me on.
Look, everybody could complain about, the transfer portal and NIL and all this stuff, but, man, it has made college football basically a 365-day sport. I mean, it was already that way in the SEC. We're passionate enough, but this time of year was kind of like the slow time where things slowed down. But you're right. You hit on the big headline, Nick Saban retiring. I guess take me back a couple of weeks when you hear the news. What was your initial reaction? And, for a legend like that to step away just so abruptly, man, just the repercussions across the college football world, it's crazy.
No, exactly right, man. I think it truly was like a where were you when kind of moment. Like, I think everybody will look back in several years and tell the story of, oh, I was in line at a coffee shop, or I was driving home from work, or I was doing X, Y, and Z. And so for me, I was coming back from the coaches convention that was up here in Nashville. And it was kind of like the last day. I think they were doing like head coaches meetings. So I was just trying to like poke my head in there and see what was going on. But I think my initial reaction was not overwhelming shock. It was just one of those things that you knew was eventually going to happen. You just didn't realize it was going to be today, if that makes sense. Like seeing the tweet pop up on your phone, if you're subscribed to the like On3 Twitter account, they tweeted it out, Pete Thamel tweeted it out. And seeing that, you at first you want to like double check and like, is this real? Okay, that's like the Nick Saban. And then but once the dust kind of settled, I think my biggest takeaway was, all right, this is just someone who's, going out on his own terms. He's over 70 years old, and he arguably just had his best coaching job ever, taking that team from losing in double digits at home week 2 to an SEC championship and making, a run at a national title, being a play away from forcing a second overtime. So all that to say, I don't think I had any feeling of like, oh, he's lost his fastball, it's about time for him to go. It was like, this is the GOAT saying I've had a great career. I'm walking away. It's time for me to, focus on some other things. And I thought the Reese Davis interview was really telling, with him just saying I couldn't do it the way I wanted to do it anymore. Like I was more tired during the season. I couldn't perform at the level that I wanted to perform. Now, Nick Saban's level of performance that he expects versus what the average Joe expects, I'm sure is a pretty good degree of variance in between those. But all in all, just put a bow on it. The GOAT saying it was time and going out on his own time.
It's always difficult to be the guy who follows the guy, and obviously they the search was pretty expedited. I mean, within 72 hours they found their next guy. But from all the names that were thrown out there, I thought Sark would have been fantastic, but obviously he's got a good thing going at Texas. I thought Mike Norvell, with all the complaining about we went undefeated in the ACC with Florida State and we couldn't make it, I thought, oh, he'd be perfect. Dan Lanning was a guy that obviously had SEC ties and coached at Georgia and Alabama. So, of all the names that were thrown out there, maybe Kaelen DeBoer wasn't at the top of my list, but what do you make of the Kaelen DeBoer hire? To me, I'm kind of in wait and see mode. I know there's been a lot of national people say, oh, this is a home run hire, but I ask, what is a home run hire? I mean, it's the expectation, hey, he might win a championship in the next 5 years. That's great for anywhere else not called Alabama. At Alabama, their expectation is championship every season. So what'd you make of the Kaelen DeBoer hire, and was there somebody else maybe at the top of your list that you thought would be a good fit there?
Yeah, Chris, I'll say this. We got a lot of I'm staying hype videos from a lot of different schools before we got Kaelen DeBoer's announcement. So that kind of just leads me to feel like, all right, maybe Bama took a swing at Mike Norvell, at Steve Sarkisian, at Dan Lanning. I don't know that to be 100% the case or not. I have to imagine it would be malpractice to not at least give those guys a call. So I don't know where Kaelen DeBoer was on the list. I don't think he was at the bottom by any stretch. I don't think he was number one. I think for me, I'm like, okay, the guy's 104-12 as a head coach. Like as a head coach, I have zero reservations. Now to win at Alabama, something you just hit on, to win at the level they expect, it takes a lot more than just being a great head coach. And Alabama was so successful over the course of the last 17 seasons, yes, because you got the greatest of all time running the show for you. But on top of that, the way they recruited, was second to none. Like that current roster in Tuscaloosa, even with all the portal moves, still stocked with nothing but top 2 classes. And so to compete at that level in the SEC, for it to take that kind of, recruiting prowess, I wonder if Kaelen DeBoer is going to be able to do that. And I understand they just had a huge commitment the other day with Landon Ryan Williams. Like that was massive, obviously, keeping him in the state and getting him to recommit. But I struggle to believe that he's going to consistently out-recruit Steve Sarkisian, Kirby Smart. Heck, Brian Kelly at LSU are recruiting at a top 10 level now. So I think with that margin for error shrinking in the SEC and the ties he doesn't have in the Southeastern Conference, again, no reservations as a head coach. I'm just curious how long it's going to take for him to get an equal roster over the course of the next couple of years to beat those guys and ultimately achieve what they expect, which is SEC titles.
Yeah, I have a friend who is close to a recruit who was considering Alabama, and what I heard from him, at least what he told me, is that he said a lot of players are kind of in wait and see mode. Like they want to see what the football looks like first, and then they'll go from there and kind of, okay, if Kaelen DeBoer hits the ground running and his offense looks awesome, then yeah, look, he's going to recruit. They're going to get a ton of recruits, and they're going to say, look, Alabama's not having any kind of fallback. But of course, we got to see it to believe it. And look, we're going to find out very soon. I know you put out your a couple days ago. You kind of did your top 12 on where teams stand right now, and you had Alabama at 7. And it was kind of funny. It took me back. I'm like, wow, it's just weird to see that reality punch, that gut punch of Alabama not in the top 5. But I think that's kind of where we are right now. But you also have Georgia up there, number 1. And it's funny, all this talk of Alabama in recent weeks, we tend to forget Kirby Smart's something like 42-2 in the last 3 seasons. Like, it really sets up for Georgia to go on a run again here.
Yeah, and I mean, with what they did through the portal and then bringing Carson Beck back, and then just what you said, like that final boss level of you got to go through Saban to win in Atlanta, to win the whole thing, like that's no longer necessarily the same case. Now, yeah, Steve Sarkisian to the mix. I'm sure Brian Kelly at LSU will be a force. Who knows what Oklahoma brings to the table. Like the SEC will still be the SEC. Ole Miss is going to be a massive factor, I think, this coming season. But I think that all that to say, with as much opportunity as they have, I think the pressure on Georgia now is as high as it's ever been in Athens. Coming off of 2 national championships and then missing a shot to the college football playoff by 3 points this past season. A lot of pressure in Athens, and then I think they feed off of that. I think they enjoy that, but at the same time, teams react to pressure on a year-to-year basis in different ways. So I'm really curious to see how they respond to that, and I'm curious to see how a Saban-less SEC impacts Georgia. Are they just kind of the next dynasty that we're going to get here, and they win 3 and 4 years, or is it a thing where with the more wide path of the college football playoff with getting 12 teams in there, you get Ole Miss in there, maybe you do get LSU in there, so that's going to be really, really fascinating, because it used to be a 2-game season once you win your conference. Now it's going to be a handful of games, and you got to make sure you match up with the right team, and so it's going to be wild. But I do think Georgia, with what they have on that roster, with Kirby Smart being in charge, I have a hard time putting anybody else ahead of them right now.
More with JD Pickell here in just a second, but I want to remind you guys, look, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin, right in the middle of one of the worst flu seasons in over a decade. It can be scary. Can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if your significant other or one of your kids gets sick while a supply chain issue keeps them from life-saving medication that they need. Thankfully, you're going to be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, a ton of other stuff. It could happen to any of you. Go visit jacemedical.com. jacemedical.com. Complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It has never been more important to be prepared than today. Again, go to jacemedical.com. That's Jase if you need the correct spelling, and use our offer code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON. It's going to get you $20 off your order. It's jacemedical.com. Use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Continue our conversation with JD Pickell of On3Sports to kind of talk a little bit about in the start of the offseason as we look ahead to the spring. And JD, obviously we cover the SEC here. We talked a little bit about Georgia and Alabama, but in your mind, what's the biggest question mark for some of these other teams going into the spring? I mean, when you look at Ole Miss, that is obviously a preseason top 10 team, they answered so many questions through the portal, but they lose one of their best players in Quinshon Judkins. To me, it's like Ole Miss has got everything figured out, but now it becomes who's going to be that running back. We know Logan Diggs transferred from LSU is a little bit banged up. They got some decent guys on the roster, but it's like they got everything except that one thing. If Quinshon just would have come back, man, I'd be all aboard the Ole Miss bandwagon.
Which is crazy because you heard, and I don't know what's true or not true, but you got the vibe of, hey, is this NIL fueled? Why is the top player who's getting a ton of playing time jumping into the portal? And it's funny because if there's someone who knows the market value of the portal, I was talking with a coworker about this, like it's Lane Kiffin. Like if there's someone who knows the value of running backs in the transfer portal when it comes to NIL, it's Lane Kiffin. So no idea what that conversation did or didn't entail with him jumping in the portal. But no, I think you're exactly right. Like outside of that running back room, and I think Logan Diggs will kind of be a plug and play guy. Maybe he's not Quinshon Judkins, but still good production. I mean, they're going all in on 2024. I love what they did on the defensive line. Landon Walter Nolan, Landon Princely Emmanuel, 2 top 10 players for us from the portal here at On3. I feel like they have done a lot to meet the price of admission to win the SEC, which is, as long as Lane Kiffin's running the show, you feel pretty confident they're going to be in that 30 points a game range. You know, the offense is going to be just fine as long as he's drawing it up. But to have the big boys up front to compete with the Georgias, the Alabamas historically, the LSUs, like the way they've kind of leveled up there, that's going to be dangerous. I mean, Lane Kiffin has had 2 10-win seasons the last 3 years. For all the Twitter jokes he gets and all the commentary on Lane Kiffin that Lane Kiffin provides, he goes to football and he can assemble a good roster. So I'm excited to see what they do. In terms of question marks across the SEC, I think Missouri is fascinating. They got one of my favorite players in the country coming back playing quarterback and let Brady Cook. I'm excited to watch him go at it another year, Luther Burden. So the roster's in great shape. Last season, as storybook as it was, they had 4 games they won by 1 score. And so I'm curious if they're able to kind of recapture that magic. Do they level up from last season and they aren't even having that many 1-score games? And they were also, I mean, they had a tremendous amount of momentum into the second half of last season. Like, I think they finished the year 5-1 with that 1 loss being to Georgia. And they even gave Georgia a run for their money. So the fact they were so hot and had so many 1-score games go their way, is that something you can recreate from season to season with losing Cody Schrader? I don't know. But I will say, if we started the 12-team playoff last year, I don't think anybody wanted to play Missouri in that first round. I truly believe that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned where you were when the Saban news came out. We were at the Bear Bryant Awards in the middle of interviewing Eli Drinkwitz when the news came out. And, it's funny. I was looking on the schedule and, Mizzou goes to Tuscaloosa in late October. I'm sure that, that game maybe got a little bit easier. Not to say Kaelen DeBoer can't do a good job, but like with Saban retired, I think Eli kind of smiled a little bit when he heard that news. And certainly, like you said, to win double-digit games at Mizzou, can he take that next step forward again this year? And 10-2 this year has kind of become the mantra. You go 10-2, you're probably in the 12-team playoff this year, no matter who you are in the SEC. So going to be really fascinating to see what Drink does there at Mizzou. And obviously Luther Burden. I mean, my gosh, I've already seen some of those way too early preseason lists, and he's like the number 1 wide receiver on there. So going to be fascinating. Let me ask you about some of the coaches on the hot seat. When we talk about, obviously Billy Napier at Florida, I think that's a no-duh. Look at Sam Pittman at Arkansas. But I also think Shane Beamer at South Carolina taking a step back last year, not making a bowl game. Of all 3 of those guys, like which situation kind of intrigued you most?
Yeah, I think the Florida one probably does intrigue me the most, just because it does feel like a no-duh. But then I look back at his time at Florida, like this past year, their over-under win total was 5.5. And so they went 5-7, had a couple of really close losses, found a way to lose the Arkansas game, found a way to lose the Missouri game. And so if they went 7-5 and those 2 1-score games bounced the other way, woulda, shoulda, coulda. But are we talking about Billy Napier differently? Are we talking about a 7-5 a year being overachieving for Florida in their past season? So I think just the whole standard that he inherited going to a place like Florida, he knew what he signed up for. But at the same time, I don't know that situation that he got from a roster standpoint was ready-made for success. I think the progress Graham Mertz has had has been tremendous. I think Eugene Wilson having an incredible true freshman season is a tremendous sign. So I'm very, very intrigued by that whole situation, how they'll treat it going forward. I got people jumping into our live chat during our show saying he gets 3 games and then he's fired. He doesn't do well there. And I'm like, wait, hang on. Like 3 games? It's all we're giving the guy. We got to give him a little bit longer than that in this Hunger Games style SEC kind of season where there's no divisions and Florida finishes with like a ridiculous 4-game stretch. So all that to say, I'm very curious how to assess him, because I do think you have to assess him on a little bit of a curve.
A quick thought on the 2 teams coming to the SEC. It's so fascinating. I was talking with some folks in Austin the other day, and it's so weird. Football has already turned the page. They're in at the SEC, like mentally. They're recruiting for the SEC. They're preparing for spring ball for the SEC. They're in the midst of a basketball season where they're still playing in the Big 12. Baseball and softball are about to start up, and they're still in the Big 12. So it's weird. Like half the campus is in the SEC, half is still in the Big 12. But that said, like, man, 2 big-time power programs, whereas I guess in the last decade, you could argue Oklahoma's been way far ahead of Texas. But here we are, both teams coming in, and it feels like Texas, obviously just making the playoff with Sark, feels like they're well ahead of the curve. What do you make of those two programs and how they're going to do first year in the SEC?
Yeah, hey, it just means more, right? That's fun that they're already getting the SEC vibes going on the 40 acres. I think what you said was exactly how I feel. Texas is probably a year ahead. Now that whole year ahead, thought could kind of reset here depending on what happens this upcoming year with how Jackson Arnold translates. Because Quinn Ewers will be there for one more year. Feels like they kind of have this 1 year window with him coming back to kind of set the tone in the SEC and build off what he did last year. But I mean, what it comes down to for me between those two teams, someone asked us yesterday, is it going to be Brent Venables or Steve Sarkisian win a national championship? And while that's a huge question, my thought process goes to, okay, well, who hits on a quarterback first? Is Jackson Arnold all that he is, advertised as, and is Arch Manning all that he's advertised as? That's a lofty statement to make about a guy with the last name Manning, but I really think it's true. If you have a quarterback, you have a chance. And Jackson Arnold, as much as his showing in the Alamo Bowl was a little bit disheartening for an Oklahoma fan, I kind of left that game saying, okay, I see a lot of the things that made him a 5-star cat out of high school. And for Arch Manning, there's just this great mystery of what does he bring to the table. So I will say this, kind of going back to the thought around what year one presents for both teams. I think both need to avoid the reputation coming out into the 2024 season of being like that second tier SEC team, kind of avoid that 8-4 year, or heck, even 9-3 year, depending on how that looks to the losses that they gather, which teams those losses are to. That could just kind of set a weird optical vision for recruits and how they're going to be viewed in the future in the SEC. Not that that's reality, but just, I mean, this as well as anybody, Chris, you got to recruit to be able to be in that top tier of the conference. And so both have done that to this point, but being compared to other schools like the Bamas, the Georgias, the LSUs, and everything that the SEC offers, I think year one is going to be crucial to kind of show what they are in their new conference and what recruits are going to sign up for.
He is JD Pickell, of course, host of the Hard Count over there at On3Sports. Does an awesome job with all the daily college football videos out there. And I got to ask JD, your setup looks awesome at On3Sports. Is that at your house? Because the way you turn around, like I see a story that says breaking news, and within minutes you've got a video up reacting to it. I'm like, okay, there's no way like JD drove to a studio. That's got to be all at his house.
I wish that was at my 2-bedroom apartment. That would be phenomenal. We have a great team here that does a really good job of kind of getting us prepped of if something is going to break or if something might break. So there's a fair amount of videos that never see the light of day that were scenarios that if they were to break, we also had a Caleb Downs video for if you committed to Georgia, and obviously that one never got out into the internet. But no, I appreciate you saying that. We have a great team of people that do an awesome job, and so I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm a system broadcaster.
I love it. That's a little peek behind the curtain there. JD Pickell, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at JD Pickell. Does a fantastic job over there at On3Sports. And JD, appreciate the time, man, and we'll catch up again soon, all right?
Appreciate you, man. Thanks again.
All right, that's JD Pickell there of On3Sports. Does a fantastic job, and appreciate him joining us. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Come on back tomorrow and check us out. Shout out to our everydayers who keep coming back and seeing us. We will talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. Now you can go make your second listen. Check out the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, streaming 24/7. They got all our great shows across all the sports, covering all the big national stories as well. Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. Everybody have a great day.